Good evening, everybody. It is Tuesday, and we are in week 4. I can't believe we're in week 4 already of BK 141. So we're going to kind of switch gears. We've been in chocolate for a couple weeks, and we're going to switch over to some pedophores. We're going to work with macarons this week. So there's some different categories of pedophores we'll get into and we'll chat about, and we'll kind of learn more about what category these fall under. But of course, before we get to all of that fun stuff, I want to recap on week 3. So who wants to chat? Who wants to talk about second week of working with chocolate? Are you feeling better than the first week you were working with it? Or are you just like, I don't want to touch it again? What's going on this week?
I don't like it.
Teresa. Why? Tell me why. Why don't you like it?
I think it was so hard, like rolling the ganache and then getting the chocolate on it. Then my hands were so messy. It's just a whole big mess, and I still feel like I didn't do it right. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it.
I understand, but I promise you, the more you work with it, it does get cleaner. Trust me. Like when I first started working with chocolate, I went through multiple chef coats, of course, because at that time I had no idea how to get any of these stains out. And I was just like, I thought I was going to spend my life working with chocolate, and it's horrible. What am I like? I chose the wrong profession. But no, it does get better. It gets like, once it starts to click, it clicks. It's just one of those things. And if it's something that you never really get into, that's fine, but it's definitely a good, it's a good technique to know how to do. You should know how to temper chocolate. You should know how to work with, ganache, even if you're just doing a simple truffle, because there are a lot of resorts and a lot of restaurants where they're going to take those truffles out to the table at the beginning of service. So even if it's just like they're ordering, the pre-made truffle shells, and all you have to do is work on fillings, pipe the filling into those truffles, kind of give them a roll just to finish them off, and then send those out to the restaurant. That might be something that you're going to see a lot throughout the industry. So it's definitely, you're always a more well-rounded chef the more little things you know, but it's not to say that you specifically have to get into that. It looks like Diva said she agrees. It was a mess. Francine's on the other end. She was loving it. She's into it. And then Wendy, she said that it was working for her. It was a pretty easy one for her. So that's really cool. That's really cool to hear.
I think my chocolate kept getting too cool, and then I had to reheat it, like rewarm it up, and then like rewarming it up and trying to get it to the right temperature. It was just like it took forever. I feel like it just took forever. And like I said, like I told you in my message, I just started work today, and she told me your first day you're making truffles. Almost had a heart attack. Like, are you serious? But she makes truffles.
I was gonna say, I saw that you said that she was doing cake truffles. So just kind of like, kind of taking the cake, rolling that with a different buttercream or chocolate, and making like a cake pop, but without the stick type thing is how she's gonna be doing hers. Yeah.
No more easier. But
yes,
I was so
practiced
with the ganache that I still have some in the refrigerator that I was going to practice
Good,
with.
because you can use that this week. You can fill macarons with that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you have chocolate, if you saved your ganache, guys, we're going to fill some macarons this week.
Nice.
All right. Who else? What else? What other? Say it again?
I only cried once.
Good.
But
that's good.
It was in front of all my kids.
They'll be fine.
It turned out okay.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think the kind of across the board, it's the working with it, the constant like on and off the bain-marie. Oh, my chocolate's getting too cool. When you start to see those streaks, those gray streaks in your chocolates, if you see that happening, it's because your temper chocolate was dropping in temperature. So it's like if you start to see it get a little bit too thick, stick it back on the bain-marie. Keep a thermometer handy on it. I had mentioned a couple weeks ago, like the infrared thermometers, the ones that are just gonna like, you gun it and you just take the surface temperature. Those are great to work with when you're tempering chocolate, because remember, you're constantly stirring. So if you just like, click the surface with that gun, it'll immediately tell you, all right, you're still in working temperature. You can dip like 2 more truffles and then warm it back up. But it's a dance, and you kind of have to like really get comfortable with that dance. I saw beautiful ganache. I reached out because I know a couple of you were doing the 1-to-1 ratio and it was just too soft. So I was like, hey guys, let's just make our lives easier. Let's do that 2-to-1. So when I say 2-to-1, what I'm meaning is double the amount of chocolate as your cream. That way, like if you have, I don't know, let's say you have 100 grams of cream in your fridge and you want to make some ganache, you know, if you're doing a 2-to-1 ratio, you're just going to double that measurement, and you know, there's never any like specific amounts. It's just you're working in ratios, kind of like in bread where you're working with the specific temperatures. It's really nice to work in those ratios because no matter how much you have of something, you can always figure out how much you need of the other ingredient. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Jean loved it. Awesome. Sheena loved it and she's ready to try other fillings. Yes, so other fillings you can do. You can jazz up your ganache. You can kind of take out some of that heavy cream, replace it with like a fruit puree or something, like a raspberry puree. And then instead of that vanilla extract, you would then want to use like a raspberry liqueur, like a Chambord or something. And that will just kind of like brighten everything up and be fantastic. If you want to move away from working with ganache, you can work, one of my favorite things is called gianduja, and it's like a nut paste combined with chocolate. It's just the most beautiful, delicious, creamy, gorgeous thing you'll ever eat. Those are great fillings. Of course, you can work with caramel. Everybody loves to fill caramel, right? But you gotta work with it at room temperature, because if you try to fill your shells with hot caramel, your chocolate's gonna melt, of course. So make sure you're working with that at room temperature. Let's see, Wendy said that she's got a spatula with a thermometer in it. She found hers at Publix, but check your local baking supply. So I think that those are just the most amazing things. Like I told you guys last week, I have my little janky setup with my thermometer taped to my spatula. It works, I'm digging it. It works for me, but yeah, those spatulas with the thermometer in there, it's really cool. Because some of those thermometers, if you've ever noticed that dent, that's like a little ways up the probe, that means that it has to, whatever you're temping has to be up to that dent to get an accurate read. So if you don't have your chocolate all the way up there, it's not getting a completely accurate read. So you want to try to get those thermometers where it can read like right in the tip of the probe is really nice to have. So just keep that in mind. A lot of times like the fry thermometers will have like a higher indent. So if you find like a probe that has like a skinnier tip to it, those are awesome. The ones that I like to use is Cooper something or other. I can't remember. I'll look it up so I can tell you guys. Anything else on tempering? Anybody else want to go over anything before we move on to the macarons?
I just had trouble with my ganache setting up. Even though I did a 2-to-1, it still wouldn't set up good enough for rolling. So I ended up making molds, making bonbons, filling the molds with it, using it, piped it in that way instead of rolling.
What type of chocolate were you using again? Dark, milk, or white?
I put it in my narrative, but I was trying to get rid of some leftovers around the house. So
Okay.
Semi-sweet, dark, and milk combined.
Okay, I remember that now. Okay, yeah. So the 2-to-1 should still be fine. Sometimes milk chocolate is obviously it's between your white, between your dark. But I still like a 2-to-1 with a milk chocolate anyway. Did you have it only out on the counter? Or did you go in the fridge with it?
I did both. I left it out on the counter, and when it wouldn't set up after 8-9 hours, I put it in the fridge and it still wouldn't set up.
Okay, I'm gonna have a look at yours. I can't remember if I've looked at it or not. There's not a lot that have come through so far. Diva, I know yours was one of them, right? But yeah, I'm gonna double check that, look through that again, and then see what's going on with it. Do you live in a warmer house? Like, what do you keep your house at usually?
Well, upstairs right now it's about 77, and downstairs it's about 63.
Okay, yeah, the 63 is a nice temperature. But yeah, I'll definitely have a look at that and see what's going on there. They're usually pretty simple fixes with ganache because it's, you know, just a couple ingredients. So it's easy peasy to troubleshoot those and see what's going on there. Wendy did an Oreo cookie and cream cake with a chocolate ganache drip, very on trend. and then ganache covered Oreos, and the person got it, loved it. Good. I'm glad to hear that. I like to see that you're working with things that you're learning in class and taking that out into the field, and you're looking to work with ganache again. Yes, you will. You will use ganache a lot. In a 1-to-1 ratio, equal parts ratio is going to be great to fill a cake. Once it sets up a little bit, or when you're like enrobing a cake, if you like enrobe like a mousse cake or something in ganache. Boston cream pies, that has a 1-to-1 ratio of ganache. The 2-to-1 is going to be when you want to start rolling and cutting that ganache. And then of course you can do opposite. You can do twice as much cream than your chocolate, and that makes really nice sauces and things like that. That one will stay in its liquid form because you're using twice as much cream than your chocolate. So, all right. So if that's it on chocolate, on truffles, let's go ahead and talk about week 3 or week 4 macarons. So we've got another, it's a big one, it's a big week, it's another finicky thing. This class has a lot of finickies because we're working with confections. So working with confections, and that just naturally is going to mean that you have to be very specific with the sugar, with the chocolate, with working with petit fours. They're tiny and dainty, so you have to be like on your game when you're working with this kind of stuff, which is all the stuff that I love to do. So let's see. This week we are going to be going a little bit over the history of macaron, like, you know, kind of the confusion between macaroon and macaron. I'm going to go over that, or macaron. Some other things that I want to talk about today is of course, the methods. On the class page, we're working with a French meringue method. There is also a very popular Italian meringue method, which we will, of course, discuss as well. And then I want to go over a couple like kind of issues that you will see often in the world of macarons. So, has anybody ever had any macarons like from France? Have you guys ventured over there and had like a legit proper macaron from over there? Sophie, nice.
Yes.
Very cool.
Just-
And your feedback?
September. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. It was amazing.
And where did you go?
So, I went to Mount Saint Michel in the Normandy region. It's like this, I call it the castle, not castle, but it's like a fort, and it looks like a castle, but it's not. I don't know how to explain it, but amazing.
Very cool. That is awesome. I also have not ventured over there. So the people in the chat box, I've been to France, but as a baby. So not in my adult years, I need to go over there. But yes, if ever you can make it over there, do so, and just like, oh my gosh, just try everything and then some, because it's just probably one of the most amazing things that you'll ever do. It's always really good, you know, as a pastry chef, to kind of go to the places that certain things where they originated, and so that you can get an idea and get a feel of like what it should be. That way you know exactly what you're going for, right? Does that make sense? So a little bit about the history of a macaron. So it started back in, believe it or not, like the kind of 1700s. It was called, well, at that point, I don't know what the name was because it was like from the Arab Empire. And basically it was just like ground nuts sweetened with honey, very simple, very broad. And then it kind of started to shift towards like the North African region and onwards up to what is now Sicily. Once it hit Sicily, Italy, it then became called macaroni. And there was a lady by the name of Caterina de' Medici, or Catherine de' Medici, and she was a noblewoman. She wasn't like a princess or a queen or anything like that, but she did end up marrying King Henry II of France back in like the early 1500s. So she took her kind of almond, like ground up almond sweetened cookie, if you will, she took that on with her over to France. Then once it hit France, her pastry chefs started to refine it. They added in the actual meringue, folding that in with the ground almond. the translation for macaroni to the French translation is macaron. So that's how that kind of shifted that way. Now, where the coconut came into play with that particular cookie is kind of like after like post-World Wars, coconut started to become like a thing, it started to get involved. So instead of using like ground nuts, it then kind of switched to a more coarse ground coconut. So then that's where that kind of stems off to the macaroon with your ground coconut, your egg whites, but it's all generally all the same stuff. It's just a little bit different here and there. So once she's brought this over to France, they've kind of, you know, jazzed it up a little bit. It wasn't served with any filling. It was just like literally the cookies themselves, just the disc. And then at that point, kind of like in the early 1700s, there were some nuns, and they took that and they were making those and selling them to basically survive. And that was in the Nancy region of France. So that's their kind of claim to fame at that point. But still hasn't been sandwiched, still not seeing those really cool fillings that we know today. That didn't happen until Ladurée. Has anybody heard of that name? That Ladurée over in France, that patisserie? Well, Louis Ladurée, he had a pastry shop, and it was his grandson. His grandson took those cookies and kind of took it to that next level by then filling them and creating the little sandwiches that we know today. Another powerhouse in France that you'll see that's making macarons is Pierre Hermé. So he worked at the Ladurée patisserie shop, but he branched off and did his own thing. And while Ladurée has very kind of traditional flavors of like chocolate, you know, kind of just plain, you'll see like a pistachio. He then started making all these like really beautiful colors and really funky flavors that are like really out there. And that's where we start to see even more of a modern take on the macaron. Next Friday, guys, is what is it called? Jour du macaron. So macaron day is next Friday. So we're kind of getting ready for that this week. So, you know, next week, make another batch of them next Friday. And it's just like a really big celebration of this cookie because, I mean, it really is like one of the namesakes in France, in Paris specifically, is the macaron cookie, which actually they won't refer to it as a cookie. They will just refer to it as a pastry. They don't consider it technically a cookie, but it's a cookie. So macarons fall into the petit four category. So there are 4 different sections in the petit four category. Does anybody remember? I know we briefly touched on it in week 1. Can anybody tell me any of the categories of the petit four? Are we doing our readings yet? I know it's a little early. Well, I will tell you. So the 4 categories are going to be your glacé. That's the most common one that we see everywhere. That's like those little cakes that are, you know, covered in marzipan. It's got that fondant poured all over it. That's going to be your glacé type of petit four. Another version is going to be your fraise or your fresh ones, anything that has like cream in it. Anything that needs to be eaten that day is going to fall into that category. Another category that you'll find that isn't so common anymore, but it still is, it's going to be like fresh or dried fruits that are dipped in like a candy syrup. That's going to be another part of your petit four categories. And then what we are going to be touching on, which is of course macaron, that falls into your sec or dry category. Now, what do you think maybe some things might be in this sec category besides a macaron? Like kind of just thinking, you know, dry, petit fours are small, they should be eaten in 1 to 2 bites. Where do you go? Where does your head go? What else do you think would fall in that category? I'm going to pick on somebody. Tell me what you think. What about Jean? Jean, what do you think? Oh, Madeleines. Madeleines would fall under the set category. They're a little bit dry. They're, there's nothing in there that needs to be refrigerated. So yes, that would be one of those that would fall into that category. Some other things maybe would be a palmier. Remember those from 161? That's going to be really super dry. That's going to fall in that category. Any little kind of like cookie that can be eaten in just a couple bites is going to fall under your set version or your set category. So let's go ahead, and I want to pull up the video. The tutorial video is like 10 minutes long or so. So I don't want to eat up our class time watching that. Totally watch that when you jump out of class. But I do, however, want to go through the formula with you guys. That way, we can ask questions as we're walking through that. Because there is quite a lot, to do. And it's, like I said, it's more that it's just kind of finicky. It's not that there's like, it's not difficult. It's just finicky. Everything has to be right in place. All right, so like I said, we're going to be following the French meringue method. I will talk to you guys about the Italian meringue method, but after we go through this, that way you don't get like confused or anything. So you can see here that there's like a little space in between these ingredients and these ingredients. So here you have powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar, 200 grams, 114 grams of almond meal. Now, almond meal is almond flour. You will find either almond meal or almond flour on the bag. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter which one. It doesn't matter what it says. Just try to buy the ones that are blanched. You don't want to have it with like the skin still on there, just because we want to make sure that our cookies are as smooth as possible. The second section of ingredients is going to be your egg whites, 114 grams, and granulated sugar. So this is our meringue. And then this is the dry ingredients here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is preheat that oven to 300 degrees. It's really important to preheat your oven for these cookies because that heat in there is, you're going to get that oven spring, and that's what's going to make sure that your meringue rises properly. So be sure to preheat it. That's why we want to do it right at the beginning. That way, you've had about like a half hour or so of your oven preheating. The next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to, if you have a food processor or even a blender, you're going to take your powdered sugar and your almond flour and stick it in there. The reason that we do this is because we want as fine of a powder as possible, again, to make sure that your macaron tops are really super smooth. In the video, Chef Paul he does not sift after he's ground it, but I would suggest to do so. So once you pulse that powder and once you pulse your powdered sugar and almond flour, just put it into a sifter and knock that through once, maybe even twice if you're feeling fancy. We just really want to make sure that any larger chunks that might have been left behind, we've gotten out. So again, we're going for smooth tops. So let's go back and take a look at that recipe again. All right, so after you've got your dry ingredients ready to go, you're going to go ahead and see, look, the formula actually does say it 3 times to go ahead and sift it, but in the video it doesn't show that. That's why I wanted to bring that up. So then we're going to start working with our meringue. Now you're going to go ahead and put the egg whites and cream of tartar. If you don't have any cream of tartar, just kind of rub your bowl down in, like, cut a lemon in half, rub your bowl and your whip down in that lemon. It introduces some acid, which is exactly what the cream of tartar is, and it will help to make sure that your egg whites get as much volume as possible and also help with the stability of that meringue so that it doesn't collapse, or it's less likely to collapse. So then you're going to go ahead and whip your egg whites until it starts to get foamy. Now you don't want any liquid. Your mixer should be on like a low to medium speed at this point. You want to take it through the process slowly so that they can build as much volume as possible. If you just kind of crank it up to high heat or to high speed, you're not going to build as much volume. So you want to get it foamy, and then at that point is when you're going to start adding your sugar a little bit at a time. And then by that point, you should be on a medium speed until you get to soft peaks. It should still be nice and soft, nice and shiny. At that point, at soft peaks, that would be a great time to add any coloring or any flavoring. So you want to be kind of delicate with that. The colors that you want to work with a gel color. That way you're not introducing a lot of water in. Another thing that it doesn't kind of go over in the formula is aged egg whites. Have you guys ever seen aged egg whites in like a macaron recipe? Or if you've ever worked with them before? No? Okay, so yeah, I use aged. Good. So Wendy uses aged. Wendy, how long are you aging your egg whites for? A day. Nice. So aging your egg whites, what you're doing here, we got to dry these cookies out, right? So egg whites has water in it. So the reason that you want to age your egg whites, or basically crack them out of their shell ahead of time, that's what the aging process is just to make sure that you're getting rid of as much moisture as possible. So you can do it for the 24 hours. That would be kind of the minimum that you want to do it. Basically, you just crack your eggs, separate your egg whites, put those in a container. I would just wrap them and poke a couple holes just so that the moisture can get out. You don't want it to trap in there, otherwise it's not really doing anything. And upwards of, I know that some bakeries are doing it for 10 days. They'll age their egg whites for 10 days. Don't need to do it that long. Can you use bought egg whites? If so, how long do you age them? You can use the container of egg whites. I'm not a fan of them. I feel that the meringue doesn't ever whip up like fully. I feel like I get a lot more volume with whole eggs. But again, I know people who will use the carton and that's their thing. That's the thing about macarons, is that a lot of people are going to have their little style, their little spin on it, and none of them are wrong. You know, that's the beauty of this, is that as long as the cookie that you're getting is what it, you know, should be, as long as they've risen, they're nice and chewy in the center. There's so many different methods and ways to do it out there. So separate the egg whites, put in a container with holes, put in the fridge for 24 hours. Yes, ma'am. You do not have to, but you can do that to age your egg whites. So let's say you want to do your production on Saturday. Friday, crack your eggs, make sure you're separating the egg whites and the egg yolks. Cover your container of egg whites, save your yolks. Week 5, are we doing ice cream? Well, anyway, save your yolks, use them for whatever, and then Saturday would come around, and then you would go ahead and start prepping that meringue. How long do we age the egg whites? Since not 1 or 10 days, just do 1 day. Yeah, I don't want to like prolong your guys's production, so just the 24 hours would be fine, basically overnight. So like I said, if you want to produce on Saturday, then Friday, crack your eggs, leave those egg whites in your fridge overnight, and then revisit it on Saturday. That's what I would suggest, just so that you can kind of get rid of some of that moisture, which will help you when you get to the baking stage with the macarons. But again, you can make macarons without aging. Like if you woke up one day and you were like, I want to make macarons today, you can totally make them and have success. So let me bring up the formula back again. So we are at the stage of our meringue. So once you've added your flavors, you've added your colors, if you want to, you do not have to. Then you're going to continue to whip until you get to a stiff peak. It's very important to get stiff peaks because if you don't whip your egg whites long enough for these cookies, they're not going to rise properly. They're going to collapse. So you want to make sure that you have incorporated enough air into your meringue. Now at that point, now we're ready to marry the meringue with your dry ingredients. In the video, he is adding the dry ingredients to the meringue, and he adds it in 3 installations. You can also vice versa. You can take like 1/3 of the meringue and add it into your dry ingredients. At that stage, you don't have to worry so much about like gently folding. You can just make sure that it gets incorporated, and then take another 1/3 of your egg whites and add it in, and that's when you're going to begin to gently fold it in, and then that last 1/3 you're going to gently fold that in. Now the process of combining of combining your meringue with your dry ingredients is called macaronage. So your macaronage, you are literally like painting or smearing that batter on the sides of the bowl, because I know it sounds kind of silly, right? You just incorporated all this air, but now you want to get it out. Well, why? Why are we doing that? Because if you don't get out all, not all, but if you don't get out enough of the air that you've developed in there, then your macarons are going to like rise. They're going to go, kind of explode when they go in the oven, and they're just going to look really crazy. So you got to make sure that you are that you are deflating your batter enough, which again, in the video, he does a beautiful job showing you exactly what you're looking for. Oftentimes you will hear people say, oh, well, it should be like molten-like or lava-like. I don't know about you, but I've never seen a volcano up close. I don't know what lava looks like. So he does a great job showing you exactly what you're looking for. If you're familiar with the ribbon stage, when you're making like a pot of bomb, when you're combining your sugar syrup with your egg whites, or sorry, with your egg yolks or your whole eggs, then you go for that ribbon stage where when you're kind of drizzling it, it should hold before it kind of relaxes. That's what you're looking for. That's what you're going for. So we use a great kind of terminology in here, exhale. It should exhale down the sides of the bowl. So it should be there and then it just goes, and then just kind of relaxes down a little bit. So that's what you're looking for. Then at that point, you are going to get a piping bag with a round tip. Don't use your star tip this week, just your round. And you can either use a silicone mat or a parchment paper. That is totally up to you. I like to bake on parchment just because with the silicone mats, there's almost like no traction, if you will. Like it's nonstick, completely nonstick. So I find that I have an easier time with my shells drying out when I work with parchment. But also you can totally work with silicone because you get prettier bottoms. Actually, you'll get a prettier bottom. There won't be any wrinkles on the bottom of the cookie when you're working with a silicone mat because there is not going to be any creasing of the paper going on. So they both have their pros. They both have your cons. To whatever you are comfortable working with, whatever you have available to you. Once you have piped them out, working with a template is really helpful. I would say probably like a little bit larger than a quarter size I would do. I think like 1.5 inches is what it suggests through here. That makes a really nice kind of a nice size macaron, I would say. The figure 8, so sorry, Cindy said the figure 8 is a good way of telling when your mixture is ready. That will definitely be a good way. You can do the figure 8 and it should just kind of gently relax. It should stay for a couple seconds and then relax. If it's too loose, if you've overworked your batter, you're not going to get the right outcome from your cookies. So like when you're piping them, they're going to spread way too much and become really flat. So you want to make sure that they are kind of holding themselves. I think I missed a question in here. Let's see, how much cream of tartar? It's just, I would probably, for what's here, I would probably put like a teaspoon in there. Not a lot. Like I said, it's just to help like stabilize your meringue. So piping out. So using a template is good. In the video, it'll show you kind of, how to make your template. Make sure you flip it over so the ink side is not up. And then you're just gonna go and pipe them on your mat. Now this part is really important. Again, we wanna make sure that there's not too much air trapped in the cookies. So you're going to kind of just take your pan, and this is the fun part. It's like my favorite part of making macarons. You wanna smack it on your countertop. I do one side a couple times until I start to see some bubbles pop up on the tops of the macaron. You can take a little toothpick and just kind of like pop them to make sure that you get rid of those little bubbles, and then spin your pan and then again rack it on the countertop to get rid of, like, to release any air bubbles that are there. You can also do it in your hand. Some people will just like hold it and like rack the bottom of it, but I like to just do it on the counter, slam it down a couple times, just like rack it on there a couple times. For the cream of tartar, yes, just use like a teaspoon. For what's there, just like a half teaspoon. You honestly don't need a lot of it. It's just to introduce an acid to help to make sure that your meringue is stabilized. All right. So once you have allowed your kind of any residual air that's built up in there, once you've knocked that out and got rid of that, you're going to leave your pan on the counter. And this part is to dry out the skin. You want to leave it there until when you touch it, you can just like very lightly touch the top. You don't want to like shove at it or poke at it or anything. Just kind of graze your finger across. It should be dry to the touch. It shouldn't be like sticky or tacky anymore. It would have really smoothed out and just gone dry. And this is going to help to make sure that as the cookie rises, that it develops a really nice foot. So now your foot is, you know, that like ruffly part around the bottom of your macaron, that's what we refer to as a foot, the foot of the macaron. All right, so now we've gone through the formula. What questions do we have of the process of making your macaron cookies with the French meringue method? Cindy said she has meringue powder. Use that instead of cream of tartar. So meringue powder is going to be actual egg whites itself mixed with an acid. So I would just use either the cream of tartar or the lemon juice alongside your egg whites. Really good question. What other questions do we have?
Hey, this is Sophie here. I'm going to be making the traditional method while my children are at school for a million reasons, but the most important for this one is that one of my kids is allergic to every kind of nut on the face of the planet. So has anybody ever found an almond meal alternative that's halfway decent so that when I make this, I can then make something else because they'll be so pretty that I don't want him to miss out?
I have a couple of recipes that I will send you. I think I sent them to Francine already, I believe. And one is made with cornmeal, and yes. And then the other one is, oh man, I can't think right now. The other one, pumpkin seeds, ground pumpkins.
I was thinking about that, but I was thinking I needed to grind my own, but it was Taco Tuesday, so I was looking at cornmeal today, and I was wondering, because I was like, oh wait, I would just need to pulse it a few more times, but I would love it if you could share those recipes with me. I might try both.
I will send them out because I see a couple more people who are interested in making like a nut-free version. Make the traditional ones like Sophie's doing, because it's always good to make things as is, but I will totally send you the other ones. That way you can like experiment and have fun with those other styles as well.
Now, between the two alternatives, is there a preference, or what's the difference between, does the corn one have definitely a corn taste? Is the texture better? I'm assuming the texture is better on the corn and the taste is better with the pumpkin?
Actually, I have found more preference with the pumpkin seed one over the cornmeal one. That's just me. That's just my preference. I don't know, the pumpkin seed one is it's really nice. It's a really nice recipe. The cornmeal one is a little bit more, it's a little more difficult to work with, I would say. I would say that.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, Francine bought her bag of pumpkin seeds. Awesome. Good. I can't wait to see those. So any other questions on like the actual method of like your French meringue method? I'm not going to take a half an hour to go over the Italian meringue method, but it's generally the same thing, except the only difference is instead of making a French meringue, which is your common meringue, just adding your granulated sugar to your egg whites, you're going to be using an Italian meringue. So you're going to cook your sugar syrup to softball stage, and then slowly pour that into your egg whites, create an Italian meringue, and then at that point you would marry that with your dry ingredients. The ratios are going to be a little bit different. With a French meringue, it's a little bit less sweet because you need more sugar in an Italian meringue than you do a French meringue. But because you were working with cooked sugar, the meringue is a lot more stable than French meringue is. So a lot of chefs like to work with the Italian over the French, just because when you get to the macronage stage, it's a lot more forgiving at that stage. It's a lot less likely to kind of like mess that up at that point when you're working with an Italian meringue. Now I've heard that like if you don't have a convection oven, if you're working with, you know, a conventional instead of a convection, that the Italian kind of can be a little bit finicky. I personally don't have I have a conventional oven in my house. I don't have a convection, and I'm able to get the Italian meringue version knocked out in my house easily. So I don't find an issue there, but it is something that has been brought to my attention that some people feel with the Italian meringue, it's a little more difficult in the conventional. Let's see here. Sheena said, if we don't have a processor, what can we use to pulse the sugar and flour? If you don't have it, don't worry about it. In all honesty, just go ahead and put them together and sift it a couple times. It is not a requirement. If you get like, if you have cookies that have like a little bit of lumps and bumps, like it's a little bit bumpy on top, which let's see, if we have time, I'm gonna pull a picture up so you can see like a smooth top and a bumpy top. It's still gonna be delicious. That's the thing. Like we kind of, you know, aspire to reach like our absolute best, right? We want absolute perfection. And as pastry chefs, we have to train ourselves of when to understand like enough is enough. We've got it. This is a good product. But yeah, you can obviously totally strive to get every single tick, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be a good product. If maybe the top is a little bit lumpy, maybe the sides were a little bit lopsided, you just revisit it again and you know, okay, maybe I piped them a little bit off if they're lopsided. I need to kind of pipe right on top so that they rise straight up. So, you know, if you go in at an angle, they're going to be a little bit wonky. So you want to kind of get right on top of it and pipe those out. Let's see, Francine, I get the feeling this is really time sensitive, just nervous because you're impatient. Yeah, Francine, you got to slow it down with these cookies. This class is just kind of a slow down kind of class because there are a lot of like moving parts here, but it's as long as you just kind of, you know, slow down, go step by step, make sure that you are meased out. Having an organized workspace is so, so important. That way you can be ready to move on to the next step and on to the next and on to the next. Because we know that with a French meringue, if you leave it there, it's gonna start to collapse. So once you're done with your meringue, your dry ingredients need to be ready so that you can start your macronage process and you're not leaving that meringue just sitting there. Jean wants to do some chocolate cookies. You can add cocoa powder. Yes, I will message you, or I'll put on the class page actually the adjustment to go ahead and do cocoa powder. I, again, would like to see plain ones, but you are more than welcome to do a batch of cocos as well. But for the submission that you're turning in, just make sure that they are plain. You can even do pistachio. You can use other nuts for this. It doesn't have to be almond. You can do a pistachio one. Almond is just the fat content, and an almond is just nice for this type of cookie. You wouldn't want to do like a Brazil nut that has, oh God, so much fat in it. It would be a little bit tricky to work with. The size, what size tip? I would use like, I would probably use like a centimeter, 1.5 centimeters. I can't think, I know that there's like the different brands and whatever. So I'll send that out to you guys as well. That way I'll show you like if you have a Wilton, what size Wilton you should use. If you have an Atico, however you want to say it, which size you should use. That way you know exactly which one to get. But it's just like the one, like that little guy right there. Where's my camera? Sugar. What about sugar, Wendy? Did I miss something? Jean, just sift it with the almond flour and the sugar. Okay, yes, your powdered sugar. Powdered sugar and almond flour are getting, for the cocoa powder. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to catch all your questions. Don't be mad at me. Template for the macaron. Just draw your own. You'll probably want to do like 1.5 inch circles. You could do would be fine. And then just draw them on your parchment, turn that over, and that way you can pipe right on top of that. Teresa said she tried to make macarons before and it was really thin. How do we get the height? So if your macarons did not rise, you probably overworked your batter. If you overwork that batter and deflate it too much, you're not going to have any rise. So it's all in the macaronage. The most important steps of the macaron cookie is the meringue and then the macaronage process, which is when you're going to, combining your dry ingredients and your meringue together. That's probably the most important part about the whole process, because that's where you're going to get all the little differences in your cookie. Overworking it, it's going to spread, it's going to end up thin, it's not going to rise properly. If you underwork it, same thing. If there's too much air still in there, you didn't deflate it enough, it's going to kind of like explode. Your feet might be spread out too much, which when I post a field guide on the class page, there's one website and there's one YouTube channel link that I put in there for you guys, Indulge with Mimi and Bake Toujours. Really great troubleshooting for macarons. I like that site and that YouTube page a lot because she goes into so much detail. So I had just a couple more things that I want to go over with you guys before we break away. And let's see, Holly just kind of steered us into that. Fillings. So some things that you can fill it with. You can use jam. If you're going to use jam, I would take your ganache or your buttercream and make just like a barrier around it with a small tip, or even if you just use a pastry bag without a tip. And then in that little hole that's left there, you're going to put your jam and then sandwich them together. You can do just regular ganache. You can steep your cream with like coffee and maybe some mint leaves, other herbs. You can steep the cream and then like boil it, put whatever you want to steep in it, leave it for like 15 minutes or so, strain it out, stick it back on the stovetop, bring it to a boil, and then put it in your chocolate. And then of course you can do a buttercream. I would recommend an Italian meringue or a Swiss meringue buttercream there. Who's got a question? Nobody? Is that just somebody's mic? All right. So those would be some filling options. I don't care what filling you do, have at it. Flavor-wise, when you're doing, when you're flavoring a macaron, the flavoring typically comes from the filling. So the only times you're really going to flavor the shell is if you are doing a pistachio one, it's actual pistachio, or if you're doing a chocolate one. I know that in the formula it says you can add your flavors or your colors to the batter itself, like at that meringue stage. But in all honesty, most of the flavoring is gonna come through in your filling. That's more often than not where you're gonna see the flavor come through. Do you have a nice recipe for Italian and or Swiss? I do. I'll post the ones in the class page. They're lovely. When you guys get to BK 121, which is your next class, you're gonna work with both an Italian meringue and a Swiss meringue. The formulas in the class are gorgeous. I will put those on the class page for you. That way you can get a little kind of sneak peek into 121. Trisha, did you have a question?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to leave it on.
Oh, you're fine. I just want to make sure I didn't like skip over you or anything.
No.
So let's see.
I'm still being written.
So we kind of, went over a little bit about maybe some like troubleshooting that might happen. If you have hollow shells, some of the main ones that might happen is if you have hollow shells, you didn't deflate your batter enough. So what that means is when you look on the interior, it should all be full of your squishy goodness that is the macaron. If when you look in there, you kind of see like, you can see the cookie, but then there's a gap and then there's the shell. You didn't quite deflate it enough. Another common one that can happen is if the tops kind of sink and cave in, you didn't bake it long enough. So if you do notice that there's some sinkage, it did need to bake longer. If you've pulled them out of the oven and they start sinking, you're not going to be able to go back in. It will not continue on the process. You kind of just have to start again at that point. Cindy says she loves Italian meringue. It's the only buttercream she uses at home. I love Italian meringue buttercream as well. It is so stable. It's gorgeously smooth. It's probably withstands, not probably, it is the buttercream that will withstand your highest temperatures, as well as humidity levels. But you kind of start switching things up and adding shortening in there, not full butter, just when you really start to like deal with outside events and things like that. But generally speaking of like full butter buttercreams that are made with meringue, your Italian and your Swiss, I love Italian. It's my favorite. It's what I use all the time for everything. All right, so that was that in the chat. The only things due this week are your knowledge check and your macarons. So there's a conversion check. Oh, I have to change that. Yeah, you guys don't have a regular knowledge check this week. You have a conversion check. So ignore that. And then of course your macarons, but no discussion forum. You don't have to worry about that. You just focus on your cookies, focus on your macarons, watch that tutorial video on the class page. Watch it again, watch this again, reach out to me, have questions for me. And that's it for this week. Let's see, let's open it up. What else do we want to chat about before we break away this evening? Nothing else, guys? Well, all right. Don't hesitate to reach out, please. It's been fun. I love macarons. I can't wait to see your guys' macarons. If you want the Italian meringue version, hit me up. The French meringue, if you haven't worked with an Italian meringue before though, the French meringue is going to be easier to kind of wrap your head around just because you don't have to worry about like cooking the sugar and all of that jazz. But totally, it's something that is available if you want to do it. I'm fine with that. You can do the Italian or a French meringue version. Please, any filling that you want. Your shells, I would just like for you to, like, no chocolate, no pistachio, just stick with your almond one. If you color it, that's fine, but just a plain almond shell. And I think that is it. That is all that I shall need from you guys this week. Make sure that you review your required photos for the week. Make sure you're submitting each photo. I don't want to take points away just because you've missed a photo. So look at that list. Make sure you know exactly what pictures that you need to take. It's easy to kind of keep a list next to you while you're going through production, especially on a week like this where like you're going into the next step and the next step. Having like a little guide of knowing what pictures to submit is really, really helpful. That way you're like, you can pause real quick and snap it, and make sure you have all your photos. Sophie says, nope, no questions. You are so welcome. It has been so much fun again. And I hope that you have a fantastic evening, guys. See you later.